The night she left, there was no moon. That was the only reason she made it out alive. Clara Whitfield was 31 years old the night she walked out of the house on Birch Creek Road with nothing but a cracked phone, $17 in cash, and a body that felt like it had been put through a machine. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. 3 of her ribs sent sharp pain through her chest with every breath. And the cut above her brow, still fresh, had stopped bleeding only because the cold November air had frozen it shut. She didn't run. She couldn't. She walked slowly, deliberately, one foot in front of the other, like a person who had just learned how to move again. The gravel road crunched beneath her boots. The pine trees on either side stood like black walls. Somewhere behind her, the lights of the house were still on. She didn't look back. She had made a promise to herself the last time she was in the hospital. The second time, not the first, that she would never look back again. She had broken that promise before. But something was different tonight. Something in her chest had finally gone quiet. Not numb. Not hopeless. Just finished. Like a fire that had used up every piece of wood it could find and had simply stopped. For 6 years, she had lived inside a kind of hell that is nearly impossible to explain to someone who has never been trapped in it. People always ask the same question. Why didn't you just leave? The answer is never simple. It's not fear alone, though fear is enormous. It's not love alone, though love twists into strange shapes in those kinds of relationships. It's something deeper. A slow erosion. A grinding down of the self until you don't fully know who you are anymore. Until you start to believe the things he says about you. Until leaving feels not just dangerous but impossible, like trying to swim when you've forgotten there was ever a shore. Derek Whitfield was charming to everyone who wasn't Clara. He coached youth football. He made people laugh at barbecues. He held doors open for strangers. Inside their house he was someone else entirely. The change had been so gradual at first that she had almost convinced herself she was imagining it. A shove here. A harsh word there. Then, over time, the walls of her world grew smaller and smaller until she was living inside a space no bigger than his anger. She had tried to leave twice before. The first time he had found her at her sister's house within 6 hours. The second time she had made it to a shelter 2 counties over, but without money, without a job she could access, without a car registered in her name, she had drifted back. Not because she wanted to, but because the alternative felt formless and terrifying. Survival requires something to hold on to, and she had nothing left to hold. Tonight was different because he had gone too far, even by his own standards. She didn't know if he would come after her. She didn't know if he was even conscious. What she knew was that the road beneath her feet was real, and the cold air in her lungs was real, and every painful step she took was carrying her further from that house. She walked for 2 hours before her legs gave out. She sat down at the edge of the road, on a patch of frozen grass beside a rusted highway sign. She looked up at the sky, which had finally cleared, and saw more stars than she had seen in years. She didn't know it yet, but she had crossed into the eastern edge of the Pine Ridge Reservation. She didn't know that a truck would come around the bend in less than 20 minutes. She didn't know that the man driving it would change everything. She just sat there, shaking, looking at the stars, and for the first time in 6 years she was free. His name was Joseph Running Bear, and he almost didn't see her. He had been driving back from his cousin's place on the far side of the reservation, later than he had intended, the heater in his old pickup working hard against the November cold. His headlights caught the edge of something pale at the side of the road, a shape that didn't belong there, hunched and still, like an animal that had given up trying to run. He slowed. He stopped. He sat in the truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, engine idling, watching. He had lived on these roads his whole life. He knew what danger looked like, and he also knew what suffering looked like. They were not always different things. He stepped out of the truck. When Clara saw the headlights, every nerve in her body fired at once. She scrambled backward, scraping her palms on the frozen gravel, her heart slamming against her broken ribs. She could not see the person clearly. Only a shape against the light. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. "I'm not going to hurt you." The voice was low and calm, like water moving over stone. He stopped walking and held both hands up where she could see them. He didn't move closer. "I'm not going to come any nearer. You can stay right where you are. I just need to know if you're hurt." She stared at him. The logical part of her mind, the part that had been ground down but never fully destroyed, registered that he had stopped. That he had raised his hands. That his voice did not carry the edge she had spent 6 years learning to fear. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice cracked on the word and made a liar out of her. He didn't argue with that. He just looked at her, really looked the way people rarely do, and she felt suddenly transparent, as if every bruise and fracture and year of suffering were visible on the surface of her skin. It was not a comfortable feeling. But it was not threatening either. "There's a blanket in my truck," he said. "And some water. I can leave them right here on the road and get back in if you'd like. Or I can sit here and keep you company for a while. Whatever helps." She said nothing for a long moment. The wind moved through the pines. The stars kept burning. "What's your name?" she finally asked. "Joseph," he said. "Joseph Running Bear. I live about 12 miles from here. I'm on the tribal council. I can give you names, references, whatever you need. I'm not in a hurry." He paused. "What's yours?" "Clara," she said. Just her first name. It was all she was willing to give. He nodded as if that were completely reasonable. "Clara," he repeated, the way someone might repeat the name of something precious they've been trusted to hold. Then he walked to the truck, retrieved the blanket and a bottle of water, set them carefully in the middle of the road and stepped back. "They're yours," he said. She waited. He waited. Then she got up, slowly, painfully, and retrieved them. Joseph Running Bear was 53 years old. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair he wore tied back and hands that looked like they had done a lifetime of hard work. He had been a tribal chief for 8 years, a position he had not sought but had accepted because the people asked him to. He had buried a wife. He had raised 2 sons mostly alone. He had spent his life carrying the weight of a community that the rest of the country largely pretended didn't exist. He had seen suffering. He recognized it the way you recognize your own face in the mirror. And something about this woman, sitting broken at the edge of a road in the dark, reached past every professional instinct and touched something older and simpler in him. The oldest human instinct of all. The one that says, "This person needs help." He didn't push. He didn't ask what happened. He just sat down on the cold road, cross-legged, a few yards away from her and waited. And after a while, a long while, she began to talk. She didn't tell him everything that night. But she told him enough. By the time the first gray light of morning touched the horizon, Clara had told Joseph about the early years, the slow slide into something terrible, the 2 failed attempts to leave, and the night that had finally broken the spell for good. She spoke quietly, methodically, like someone reading from a document they had long ago memorized. She watched his face as she spoke, waiting for the look she had come to expect from people. The slightly uncomfortable pity, the faint withdrawal, the unconscious body language that said this is too much for me. It never came. Joseph listened the way very few people know how to listen. Completely. Without interrupting. Without shifting his gaze. When she stopped talking, he didn't immediately fill the silence with words. He just let it exist for a moment, giving her pain the dignity of being received without being rushed away. "You're safe now," he said at last. Not as a promise about the future, he was too wise for that, but as a statement about this particular moment. "Right now you are safe." It was enough. He drove her to the reservation. She didn't have many options and he didn't pretend otherwise. He told her plainly that there was a small community house on the grounds that had a spare room, that it was warm and private, and that no one would be told she was there unless she wanted them to be. He told her there was a woman named Alma, an elder who had been helping people in hard situations for 40 years, who would come by if Clara was willing. He told her that she didn't have to decide anything right now. What he didn't tell her, not yet, was how deeply her presence had already moved him. That would have been the wrong thing to say. But it was true. The community house was small and simply furnished, sitting at the edge of a low hill with a view of open land stretching south toward the Badlands. Clara stood at the window that first morning and looked out at a landscape that felt ancient and honest, untouched by the world she had been living in. She pressed her fingertips against the cold glass and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Space. Real, honest space in every direction. Alma came that afternoon, a small woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and a laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the earth. She brought food and medicine and an easy, undemanding presence that Clara had no defenses against. Alma didn't ask questions. She just helped. She cleaned the wound above Clara's brow. She provided an ice pack for the ribs. She made tea and sat nearby and spoke occasionally about small things. The weather, a bird she had seen that morning, the way the light changed over the hills in winter. Clara cried twice that day. Alma never commented on it. She simply handed her tissues and kept talking about ordinary things, as if tears were as natural as breathing, which Alma believed they were. Over the following week, Clara barely left the room. She slept for long, heavy stretches. She ate. She looked out the window. She let her body begin the long process of healing, which it had been trying to do for years but had never quite been allowed to. Joseph stopped by each day briefly. He brought groceries. He brought books, a stack of them, no note, just a variety, as if he understood instinctively that her mind needed somewhere to go while her body recovered. He never stayed long. Never imposed. But his consistency, the simple fact that he came every day and asked for nothing, began to reach past the walls she had spent years building. She noticed the sound of his truck before it arrived. She noticed when he was a few minutes later than the day before. These were small things. She didn't examine them too closely. But they were real. On the 8th day she opened the door before he knocked. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since she had arrived she was looking back. Not watching for danger. Not calculating escape routes. Just looking. "How are you today?" he asked. "Better," she said. "And meant it." He smiled then. It was a slow, careful smile, like sunlight finding its way through cloud cover. "Good," he said. "That's good." She stepped back from the door. "Do you want to come in for tea?" He said yes. It was the first time. Healing is not a straight line. It is a jagged, unpredictable path full of wrong turns and sudden drops, and anyone who tells you otherwise has never done it. Clara had been on the reservation for 3 weeks when the nightmares started. Not that they were new, she had been having nightmares for years, but here in the quiet they seemed louder. Without Derek's physical presence constantly demanding her attention, her mind was suddenly free to process everything she had pushed down and away and buried, and it chose to do so at 2 in the morning, in vivid and terrible detail. She would wake gasping, heart hammering, reaching for a door that wasn't there. Sometimes she would sit up for hours, unable to sleep again, watching the darkness outside the window. She felt ashamed of this. She felt that she should be better by now. That surviving should feel like winning. It didn't. It felt like arriving at the end of a war and realizing you had no idea how to live in peacetime. She told Joseph about the nightmares on a cold December morning when he arrived with firewood and found her looking hollow-eyed and exhausted at the kitchen table. She hadn't planned to tell him. It simply came out. He sat down across from her and listened. Then he told her something she had never heard anyone say before, not in the way he said it. "Among my people," he said carefully, "we believe that the body holds everything that happens to it. Every wound, every fear, every loss. It lives in the muscle and bone long after the moment has passed. Healing isn't forgetting. It's making space. Allowing what is held to move." He paused. "You've been carrying this for 6 years. Give yourself more than 3 weeks." She looked at him for a long time. "Does it ever fully go away?" He considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. He didn't offer her easy comfort. "Some of it," he said. "The sharp edges soften. The weight becomes manageable. You learn to live alongside it instead of being buried by it." He looked down at his hands. "I lost my wife 12 years ago. I still talk to her sometimes when I'm driving alone. The grief didn't go away. But it changed. It became something I could carry without being crushed." It was the most personal thing he had ever said to her. She felt the trust in it. She felt the courage it took. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said. "Loving someone enough to grieve them is not a thing to be sorry about." She started attending a weekly gathering that Alma led, a women's circle that met in the community hall, a mix of tribal members and women from outside the reservation who had found their way there through various paths of hardship. Clara sat on the outside of the circle at first, listening. She heard stories that made her own feel less singular. She heard women who had been broken and rebuilt. She heard laughter that had survived terrible things. Slowly, over several weeks, she moved toward the center. She also called her sister, finally, from the community phone. It was a hard conversation. Her sister had spent years watching from a distance, terrified and helpless, and now all of that fear came out at once as anger and tears and a kind of desperate love that Clara hadn't known she had been missed so completely. She cried for a long time after hanging up. But crying, she was learning, was not the same as falling apart. Sometimes it was the opposite. The legal questions were complicated. Derek had already contacted her sister. There were calls from his number on her cracked phone. Joseph connected her with a legal advocate in Rapid City who specialized in domestic situations. The process was not simple, but it was begun, and begun is the most important thing. One evening, after dark, Joseph built a fire in the iron stove in the community house and they sat across from each other with mugs of coffee and talked for 3 hours without interruption. About his sons, one in Colorado, one still nearby. About her childhood in western Nebraska. About the things they each believed about the world and why. About what they thought came after this life, if anything. She realized, somewhere in the middle of that conversation, that she was not afraid. Not of him. Not of the silence between sentences. Not of being known. That realization was quiet and enormous, and she held it carefully, not saying it out loud, not yet. But she held it. Spring arrived the way it always does on the high plains, suddenly, dramatically, like a curtain being pulled back from a window that had been sealed for too long. Clara had been on the Pine Ridge Reservation for 4 months by the time the grass came back and the meadowlarks returned to the fence posts along the southern road. 4 months. She had arrived broken in November dark, and now it was March and she was still here. That fact alone felt like a kind of miracle. She had a job. Alma had quietly arranged it, a part-time position at the tribal health clinic, helping with administrative work. Clara had been a bookkeeper before her world shrank, and those skills had not left her. She was good at it. She showed up on time. She did the work carefully. People at the clinic noticed. A woman named Ruth, who ran the health department, told her after her second week that she was the most organized person they had hired in years. Clara thanked her and then went to the bathroom and stood at the sink for a moment, gripping the edges, not because she was falling apart but because she was remembering. She was remembering that she was capable. That she was competent. That the version of herself who existed before the 6 lost years had not been a fiction. She had also quietly started writing. Nothing she planned to share, just a journal, small and plain, that she filled in the mornings before the clinic opened. She wrote about what had happened. She wrote about what she was learning. She wrote about the landscape which had become important to her in a way she hadn't expected. The vast, open quality of it, the way the horizon sat so far away that you could see weather coming from miles off, which felt, she wrote once, like being given time to prepare. Joseph had asked her, very carefully, one afternoon in late February, whether she might like to stay. Not forever. He wasn't asking for forever. He was asking in a practical sense. Whether she wanted to keep the room, keep the job, keep building what she was building here. He said it the way he said most important things, directly, without performance, with his eyes steady on hers. She thought about it for 2 days before answering. She thought about her sister, who had visited twice now and had sat at Alma's kitchen table and eaten fry bread and cried and laughed and said she would come back. She thought about the legal process, which was slow but moving. She thought about the nightmares, which still came but less often and with less power over her waking hours. She thought about who she was becoming here, in this place she had stumbled into on a cold night with $17 and nowhere to go. She said yes. On a Saturday evening in late March, Joseph asked if she wanted to walk with him to the top of the low hill behind the community house to watch the sunset. It was a simple invitation. She said yes to that too. They walked up together in the long golden light, and at the top they stood side by side looking west over miles of open land that glowed amber and rose and deep purple at the edges. The wind was gentle. The sky was enormous. I used to stand up here with my wife, he said. Not with sadness, or not only with sadness. With the fullness of a man who has learned to hold grief and gratitude at the same time. Tell me about her, Clara said. And he did. He talked about her for 20 minutes, uninterrupted, and Clara listened the way she had learned to listen since coming here, completely without trying to fill the space. When he finished, there was a long quiet. Then he said, I'm glad you walked out of that house. She looked at him. The last light of the sun caught the silver in his hair. She felt something move through her chest. Not pain, not fear, but something warmer and more fragile and more real than either. So am I, she said. They stood there until the stars came out, one by one, the same stars she had looked up at from the frozen roadside the night she left. She understood now that they had been there all along, not guiding her, exactly, but waiting. Patient and enormous and indifferent to everything except the fact that the universe, in its vastness, sometimes arranges small moments of mercy. She had been beaten. She had been broken. She had been alone. And then she hadn't been. That was not a small thing. That was everything.